Hello, everybody. So this is the first lecture burst for Chapter 9, lecture slides on prosocial behavior. I'm going to do my best to get through these quickly. I'm going to do probably 2 or 3 of these lecture bursts. Having a lot of coughing and issues, so I'm going to try my best to get through these without any coughing spazzes. But if you were to open your slides, this is where you would start at. I'm going to skip on down to the first slide, which talks about what prosocial behavior is, referred to as any helpful action that's going to benefit another person. And the person who's helping might not necessarily receive any actual benefits for their help, like payment or gratitude. It might even pose a risk to the person if they help. So think about helping in the case of an emergency. You could be putting yourself in danger and be at risk yourself if you're to offer help to another person. The area of prosocial behavior is broken up into a few different spokes, which look at different types of prosocial behavior. The first area that we're going to be looking at deals with bystander intervention, and that's a case of prosocial behavior where we're looking at an emergency type of situation. And what spawned the research in this area was the case of this woman, Kitty Genovese. I've put a video about this in this week's folder, so you're going to want to watch that video. And actually in the video, the researchers, Lotney and Barley, one of them at least, is talking about the case of bystander intervention and the case of Kitty Genovese, where 38 people saw a person attacking her and eventually killing her, and nobody went for help or did anything about it. And this spawned outrage, obviously. It was in the Queens District of New York back in the 60s. And obviously researchers were very outraged at why this would occur, what would lead people not to help when they all heard it. And so you're going to want to watch that video. Subsequent research from that came out looking at different situations where there is an emergency. The famous smoke-filled room study was done shortly after that. This is a remake. There's been many remakes of the original study, and you can watch this as well. I posted this video in the weekly slides. And you're going to want to take a look at what happens when a person's placed in a room and smoke starts filling the room. You're going to see how the bystander reacts when alone versus when in a room full of people. And again, I want you looking at some of the things that we've talked about previously in previous chapters. Social consensus, looking to others in an uncertain situation is what we normally do to see how other people are responding, and that informs us of how we are supposed to respond, and that's certainly what we see happening here. So please take a chance and watch that short video. And it has moments in it where there's no sound, so it's not your video player being weird. That's just how it is. Now, the research that followed a lot of this work is the bystander intervention research that I mentioned. And what we know is that in certain situations where there's an emergency happening, what occurs is the diffusion of responsibility. And that's that a person feels less responsible in an emergency situation if there's other people around to see it or witness it. So the more bystanders, people around, the less a person feels inclined to help. And that's known as the bystander effect. What factors do you think would influence whether or not help is provided? I want you to think about that for a minute before we go further. I posted some videos that you should watch in the weekly folder. There's one about a mock child abduction, a fake baby trapped in a car, and then another more recent occurrence where we really see this lack of response in bystanders, we call bystander apathy, and how electronic devices and the use of them is playing a more crucial role in the bystander effect. So the more we're on our devices, the less responsive we are to the people around us. And I want you to watch those and be thinking about this question. What kinds of things are present in those different settings, those different scenarios that affected whether or not people helped? So when you're witnessing a child abduction or what you think could be a child abduction, what did people do? What was their reaction? Who did they look for? What were their reasons given for helping or not helping? Same thing with the baby in the trapped car and so forth. What we know from the research is that there's a typical response pattern that happens in people when they're deciding whether or not they can help. And so Lotney and Darley argued that these steps have to be followed to permit helping to occur in an emergency situation. We have to notice that an emergency is happening first and foremost. If you don't recognize a situation as an emergency, you're not going to see the need to help. So number one, you have to recognize it as an emergency. You have to interpret the situation as requiring help, like, oh, this is something I need to do something about. I can't just sit here. You have to feel personally responsible, otherwise that diffusion of responsibility is going to kick in. You would have to feel like, well, I would want someone to help me if I were in that situation. Then you have to decide how to help, because not all help is created equal. Not all help is going to look the same. It depends on who you are. So for some people, they might jump in and get involved. Other people, it might be a call to 911. Other people, it might be going and grabbing another person. So it just depends. And then actually executing and providing that help. So that's all the bystander intervention research. Now we're going to turn to look at, why do we engage in actions that will benefit others? What do we get out of it? And there's some different models that we're going to talk about. The egoistic model claims that we do behaviors for others for kind of selfish reasons. So remember, prosocial behavior are positive social actions intended to help others, but sometimes there's a selfish meaning behind it. You know, we're going to get something out of it, or, you know, we're going to get praise. Think about, like, when we help others when we're young, what do we get for that? We get praise from our parents. Oh, good job. You know, and so it's a natural process of behavioral conditioning that we're going to feel good when we help other people. So naturally, that conditioning prompts us to want to help other people. And some would argue, well, is that such a bad reason? And sometimes, you know, the benefit that we get, it's egoistic because it enhances our self-esteem, makes us feel good. The opposite of that is the altruistic model, when behaviors are done for selfless reasons. And this is really key, because sometimes we get nothing out of helping. And again, we may even be in danger, but we do it anyways. We feel the draw from society, like this is something we need to do, something to step up and do, or there's just a reason that's beyond us for getting involved and doing something. The negative state relief model is another one that falls underneath the egoistic model. And that's that we provide help to relieve our own negative reaction to thinking about another person's pain. So when we think about somebody else being in pain or agony or someone else suffering, it makes us feel crappy. And we don't like to feel crappy. So to relieve ourselves of that negative state, that negative crappy feeling, we help. Okay, so it is selfish because it's removing the negative thoughts we're having, and we don't like those negative thoughts, and so that's why we help. But again, some would argue, is that such a bad reason? As long as help is being offered, that's the primary consideration. So negative state relief model really is just we're acting pro-socially so to lessen any negativeness that we might feel in our lives. Cost-benefit analysis really looks at us being more inclined to help others when it will help us as well. So kind of like what's in it for me sort of strategy. We're going to weigh others' needs over our own needs. And if helping costs us too much, we're not going to help, right? So this includes not only our own effort, but any potential negative consequences that might come from us helping. We're also going to consider the type of rewards we might achieve by helping. Like it might cost us a lot now, but we'll gain a lot in the future from it. And then mood is also another important factor. If we're in a good mood, we're more likely to help. And sometimes people help others for their own gain. We know this. Like if any of you are engaged in an internship, which I know many of you are you doing it purely for selfless reasons? Or are you doing it because you get credit, you get paid, you get experience that you need to get a job in the future, right? So you're doing work for free, which benefits the employer, but it also provides usually benefits to you as the student. So you're gaining skills, you're gaining experience and references and things like that. A lot of our helping behavior and altruistic helping behavior comes from a place of empathy. So here's where we take a little carve out and we take some time to get to understand what empathy is exactly. I've posted a video by Brene Brown. It's in the weekly videos, and it talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is an emotional and cognitive response to someone else's distress, right? It's putting yourself in that person's shoes and wanting to get down on their own personal level, take their perspective, imagine what it feels like to be them, not just feel sorry for them, right? So I want you guys to watch the video. It's awesome. It's like 3 or 4 minutes long. It's very short. But this is a key element in looking at helping behavior and pro-social behavior. Because a lot of times the situations that we're faced with when we're deciding whether or not we should help and how we should help, there's situations that often involve ethical dilemmas, you know? And when something is an ethical dilemma, it triggers our empathy. It makes us want to help. We feel bad for the person. We see a social responsibility of needing to do something to alleviate someone's suffering or pain. And so that is what drives us to get involved. But they're not always clear cut because, again, you know, we say moral dilemma. Everybody's morals are different, right? Morals are all over the place. What's wrong for one person might not be seen as wrong for another person. And so it really varies in cultures. It varies even within subcultures. But so one key thing is being empathetic, understanding what empathy is and how to activate empathy when we're considering other people's situations is going to be a prime factor in whether or not we're going to help. And so it's talked about in your article reading this week for your homework, Batson's position on empathy. And there's 3 different perspectives that we can take when we're trying to engage empathy. We can imagine how another person views an incident and how they must feel. That's going to lead to true altruism, right? We could imagine how we would feel. That's a little more selfish of a reason, but it leads to empathy nonetheless. It can impede altruism a little bit because, again, the root cause of it is a little selfish, but we may still act, right? Or we can imagine how a fictional character might feel. And in fact, kids do this a lot. They might imagine how their stuffed animal feels or their favorite TV character feels in a given situation. This can help arouse empathy level in them. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and we'll finish up on the next lecture burst looking more at altruistic motivation for helping.